it's been a bit of a shock. However much one tries to prepare oneself for something like this, it's still a dreadful shock, and we're sort of trying to come to terms with that. And it's very, very sad. But I have to say that the extraordinary tributes and the memories that everybody has had and been willing to share has been so fantastic.
When Prince Edward sat down for what seemed like a simple interview, everything changed. His hands trembled as he pulled out a letter, one the Queen wrote before she died. What he was about to reveal would shake the palace to its core. The morning, everything began to unravel like any other at Buckingham Palace. Edward stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the palace grounds. The sky hung grey and heavy over London, matching the somber mood that had settled over the royal household. Staff members who passed by noticed something different about him that day. His usual calm expression had been replaced by something harder to read, a mixture of exhaustion and determination that no one had seen before.
They couldn't say it, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you for all the wonderful messages of support from so many of you to their Majesties, and also the wonderful wishes you sent to my brother for a speedy recovery. I know he really appreciates it.
For years, Edward had carried the burden of being compared to his siblings. Charles, as the heir to the throne, commanded attention and respect. Anne earned admiration for her tireless work ethic and no-nonsense approach to royal duties. Even Andrew, despite his many controversies, had always been more visible and vocal than Edward. The youngest son learned early on to accept his position in the family hierarchy. He told himself the comparisons didn't matter, that he had found his own path through charitable work and supporting the arts. But the pressure never truly disappeared. It followed him from childhood into his adult life, a constant reminder that he would always be seen as the spare, the afterthought, the one whose presence was often overlooked. The Queen's death hit Edward particularly hard. Among all her children, he shared a unique bond with his mother. She understood his sensitive nature in ways others in the family seemed to miss or dismiss. During her final years, they spent quiet afternoons together, often discussing matters of the heart rather than matters of state. The Queen had a way of calming Edward with just a look or a gentle word. She never pushed him to be someone he wasn't, never demanded he adopt the more forceful personalities of his siblings. With her gone, Edward felt as though he had lost his anchor. In the months following the funeral, the atmosphere within the royal family grew noticeably colder. The Queen had been the glue holding everyone together for over 70 years. Her presence had smoothed over disagreements, mediated conflicts, and maintained a sense of unity even during the family's most turbulent periods. Without her steady hand, old tensions began resurfacing. Family members saw less of each other. Phone calls became less frequent. The warmth that once characterized family gatherings seemed to evaporate. Edward watched all of this unfold from his usual position on the sidelines. He saw Charles struggling to establish himself as the family's new leader, while simultaneously taking on the enormous responsibility of the crown. He observed William shouldering more royal duties, his face often showing the strain of his expanding role. Harry's absence from family life became more pronounced, the rift between him and the rest of the family appearing deeper than ever. Even Camilla, now Queen Consort, seemed to move through the palace with a careful, measured approach, aware that many still questioned her place in the royal hierarchy. Edward didn't take sides in any of these family dynamics. He never voiced strong opinions about who was right or wrong. Instead, he simply observed, absorbing the pain and distance that seemed to grow with each passing week. This is what he had always done, watching from the shadows, feeling everything deeply, but expressing little outwardly. Yet something was building inside him. It wasn't anger exactly, nor was it fear. The feeling was more like a profound sadness, a grief that extended beyond losing his mother to encompass the disintegration of everything she had worked to preserve. People outside the palace walls remained largely unaware of Edward's internal struggle. To the public, he appeared as steady and reliable as ever, showing up to engagements, shaking hands, offering warm smiles to well-wishers. But those who knew him well began noticing subtle changes. His posture seemed slightly more stooped, as if carrying an invisible weight. His smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. The silence that had always been his trademark now felt different, heavier somehow, as though it concealed something desperate to break free. During this difficult period, Edward's mind often drifted back to his childhood. He remembered sitting beside the Queen during quiet evenings at Windsor Castle. She would share stories about the monarchy's history, about the challenges she had faced, about the importance of family unity above all else. The Queen had trusted Edward with small, private tasks, recognizing in him a discretion and emotional intelligence that she valued highly. Those memories had always been precious to him, but now they brought a sharp pain. Losing her meant losing the one person who truly saw him, who understood that his quiet nature masked a deeply feeling soul. Edward tried to maintain his composure and continue his royal duties as expected. He attended official functions, participated in ceremonies, and fulfilled his obligations to various charities and organizations. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but internally he felt like someone drowning while everyone around him remained oblivious to his struggle. The storm inside him grew stronger each day, fed by memories, grief, and a growing sense that something fundamental had broken within the family structure. Then came the family meeting that would push Edward to his breaking point. King Charles had called for a private gathering, requesting that all senior family members attend. There would be no media present, no official photographers, no public record of what was discussed. Just family, sitting together to address the challenges ahead. When Edward arrived at the designated meeting room, the tension was immediately palpable. Everyone sat with careful composure, their faces revealing little but their body language speaking volumes. Charles opened the discussion with his characteristic formality. He spoke about the monarchy's future, about maintaining the institution's dignity and relevance in modern times. His words focused on image, on public perception, on the need for discipline and unity in how the family presented itself to the world. William echoed these sentiments, emphasizing the importance of a streamlined, efficient monarchy that could weather contemporary scrutiny. The conversation centered entirely on external appearances, on strategy and protocol. What struck Edward most forcefully was what wasn't being discussed. Nobody mentioned feelings. Nobody acknowledged the emotional toll of recent events. Nobody talked about the pain of losing the Queen, the difficulty of navigating new family dynamics, or the personal struggles each of them might be facing. Everything was about maintaining a perfect facade, about looking strong and unshakable regardless of what anyone might actually be experiencing internally. Then Charles said something that cut through Edward like a blade. Speaking about family relationships, the king stated matter-of-factly that some connections were simply beyond repair. The words hung in the air, cold and final. Edward felt his heart constrict. His breathing changed. Something inside him cracked open. These words represented everything the Queen had fought against. She had always believed that family bonds, however strained, could be mended with patience, love, and honest communication. She had never given up on anyone, never declared any relationship irredeemable. For the first time in his life, Edward felt an overwhelming need to speak up. The urge was so powerful it overrode decades of learned behavior, years of staying quiet and avoiding confrontation. He stood up, his legs slightly unsteady. His voice trembled as he began speaking, but the words came nevertheless. He talked about the cost of emotional dishonesty. He spoke about how the family's obsession with appearing perfect was actually destroying the genuine connections between them. He reminded everyone of the Queen's fundamental belief in the possibility of healing and reconciliation. The room fell completely silent. Charles stared at him with an expression somewhere between surprise and disapproval. William sat rigidly upright, clearly taken aback. Camilla looked down at her hands. Nobody had expected this from Edward, the family member who never made waves, who never challenged anyone, who always maintained his peaceful demeanor regardless of circumstances. When Edward finished speaking, he didn't wait for responses. His heart raced. His hands felt cold. Without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving his family sitting in stunned silence. As he moved through the palace corridors, his mind spun with the magnitude of what he had just done. He hadn't planned any of it, yet somehow it felt inevitable, as though years of suppressed feelings had finally demanded release. But what happened next would prove even more significant than his unexpected outburst. As Edward walked through a quiet hallway trying to process everything, he noticed something lying on a side table. It was a small envelope, cream-colored and formal, with handwriting he recognized instantly. The Queen's handwriting. His hands shook as he picked it up, seeing his name written in her distinctive script. Inside was a letter, one she had written before her death specifically for him. And as Edward began reading her words, he realized that everything was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Edward held the envelope with both hands, feeling its weight despite how light it actually was. The cream-colored paper felt delicate between his fingers, yet it carried more significance than any official document he had ever handled. He moved to a quiet alcove near one of the palace's smaller sitting rooms, needing privacy for this moment. His heart pounded as he carefully opened the envelope, revealing several pages filled with the Queen's unmistakable handwriting. The script was sharp and precise, exactly as he remembered from the countless notes and letters she had written throughout her life. He began reading slowly, absorbing every word. The Queen wrote about love, not in grand romantic terms, but in the deeper sense of familial connection and loyalty. She wrote about the bonds that should hold a family together, especially a family carrying the weight of the monarchy. Her words acknowledged the strain that royal life placed on personal relationships, how duty often conflicted with emotional needs, how public expectations could create private wounds. She understood all of this intimately, having lived it for more than 7 decades. As Edward continued reading, he found passages about how the family had changed over the years. The Queen had noticed the growing distance between her children and grandchildren. She had observed how pride prevented honest conversations, how past grievances festered because nobody wanted to appear weak by acknowledging pain. She wrote about watching warmth slowly drain from family interactions, replaced by formality and careful politeness that masked deeper disconnections. Her observations were precise and unflinching, showing that despite her public composure, she had seen and felt everything happening within her family. Then Edward reached the passage that made him stop breathing for a moment. The Queen had written that he was the one who saw everything. Among all her children and grandchildren, she recognized Edward as the one who truly understood the power of silence, not as a tool for avoidance, but as a space for observation and understanding. She wrote that he had always been the most emotionally aware member of the family, the one who felt the undercurrents others missed or ignored. This sensitivity, which he had often viewed as a weakness or a burden, was actually his greatest strength. The Queen's letter continued with words that shook Edward to his core. She trusted him with something she called the emotional heart of the monarchy. Not the crown itself, not the political power, not the ceremonial duties, but something she considered equally vital. She believed the monarchy's survival depended not just on maintaining traditions and public support, but on preserving genuine human connection within the family itself. Without that internal bond, she warned, the institution would become hollow, a beautiful facade with nothing substantial holding it together from within. Edward sat down on a nearby chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. The room felt simultaneously too warm and too cold. He read the letter again, then a third time, each reading revealing new layers of meaning. The Queen's voice seemed to echo in his mind, her calm and measured tone speaking directly to him across the barrier of death. He could almost see her sitting across from him during one of their quiet afternoon conversations, tea cooling in delicate china cups as they discussed matters of the heart. Memories flooded back with overwhelming intensity. He remembered being a young boy, sitting in his mother's study while she worked through official papers. She would occasionally look up and ask his opinion on small matters, nothing of major importance, but the gesture made him feel valued and seen. He recalled walks through the gardens at Balmoral, where she would point out particular flowers or trees and share stories about who had planted them decades earlier. These moments of simple connection had shaped Edward's understanding of what family could mean, what it should mean, beyond titles and duties. The letter contained one line that hit Edward with particular force. The Queen had written, in slightly larger script than the rest, "Do not let silence break the family." She had underlined these words twice, emphasizing their importance. Edward understood immediately what she meant. Silence had been his refuge for so long, his way of avoiding conflict and maintaining peace. But the Queen was telling him that silence could also be destructive, that sometimes speaking uncomfortable truths was necessary to prevent greater damage. She was asking him to do the very thing that went against his nature, to break his lifelong pattern of quiet observation and step into active engagement. He felt the weight of her requests settle onto his shoulders. For years, he had watched the family drift apart, observed tensions building, noticed conversations that never happened because everyone was too proud or too careful. After the Queen's death, these problems had only intensified. Charles focused on establishing his authority as king. William concentrated on preparing for his eventual role while managing his own family. Harry remained distant, physically and emotionally separated from the rest. Anne maintained her trademark, independence. Andrew dealt with his ongoing controversies in isolated disgrace. Meanwhile, the connections between them all grew thinner and more fragile. Edward realized he had been complicit in this deterioration through his silence. He had told himself he was keeping the peace, but in reality, he had been avoiding the difficult work of honest communication. The Queen's letter forced him to confront this truth. She wasn't asking him to cause drama or create conflict for its own sake. She was asking him to be brave enough to speak about emotions, to acknowledge pain, to insist on authentic connection, even when doing so felt uncomfortable or risky. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his inner jacket pocket, keeping it close to his heart. Standing up, he walked through the palace corridors with a new sense of purpose. The building seemed different somehow, as though he was seeing it through fresh eyes. He passed portraits of previous monarchs, each face frozen in formal dignity. He wondered how many of them had struggled with the same tensions between public duty and private feeling. How many had sacrificed genuine family connection on the altar of royal expectations? Edward found himself thinking about the documentary interview he had previously agreed to participate in. It had been scheduled as a straightforward tribute to the Queen, a safe and predictable conversation about her legacy and impact. The producers expected him to share fond memories and general observations about her remarkable reign. It was meant to be comfortable, controlled, and entirely uncontroversial. But after reading her letter, Edward felt something shifting inside him. The interview now represented an opportunity, perhaps his only real chance to honor what she had truly asked of him. The thought both terrified and energized him. Edward had spent his entire life avoiding the spotlight, carefully managing his public image to remain unremarkable and uncontroversial. The idea of speaking openly about family struggles, about emotional pain, about the cracks beneath the royal facade went against every instinct he had developed over decades. Yet he could feel the Queen's words pushing him forward, urging him toward honesty, even as his mind generated countless reasons to stay silent. He reached his private quarters and found Sophie there, sorting through correspondence. She looked up as he entered, immediately sensing something significant had happened. Sophie had always possessed an intuitive understanding of Edward's emotional state, often knowing what he felt before he fully recognized it himself. She set aside the papers and waited, giving him space to speak when he was ready. Edward pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it to her without explanation. Sophie read it carefully, her expression shifting as she absorbed the Queen's words. When she finished, she looked at Edward with a mixture of understanding and concern. She knew what this letter meant to him, understood the impossible position it placed him in. The Queen had essentially asked Edward to become someone he had never been, to transform from observer to activist, from silent supporter to vocal advocate for emotional truth. They sat together in silence for several minutes, the weight of the moment settling around them. Sophie finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. She reminded Edward that he didn't have to do anything immediately, that he could take time to process everything and decide how to respond. But even as she offered this escape route, both of them knew Edward had already made his decision. The Queen's final request wasn't something he could ignore or postpone. She had trusted him with this responsibility, believed he alone could fulfill it, and that trust demanded action. Edward spent the evening thinking about what he might say during the interview. He couldn't simply read the Queen's letter on camera, though part of him wanted to let her words speak for themselves. The message needed to come from him as well, needed to reflect his own experiences and observations. He thought about his childhood feelings of invisibility, about watching his siblings receive attention and recognition while he remained in the background. He considered the loneliness of being the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one everyone assumed was fine because he never complained. He reflected on the years of watching the family slowly fragment, seeing relationships deteriorate while everyone pretended nothing was wrong. He remembered countless moments when honest conversation might have prevented misunderstandings, when emotional vulnerability could have strengthened rather than weakened family bonds. All of this had been building inside him for decades, unexpressed and unacknowledged. Now the Queen's letter had given him permission, even an obligation, to finally speak these truths aloud. As night fell over London, Edward sat near a window, watching lights come on across the city. Millions of people out there saw the royal family as distant figures, symbols of tradition and continuity. They had no idea about the human struggles happening behind palace walls, the same conflicts and pain that affected families everywhere. Edward realized that speaking honestly about these struggles might actually strengthen rather than damage the monarchy. It could show that royals were human beings dealing with universal challenges, capable of growth and change. The next morning arrived with clear skies, a contrast to the grey weather of recent days. Edward dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt comfortable rather than formally impressive. He wanted to feel like himself during the interview, not like he was playing a role. As he prepared to leave for the studio, he picked up the Queen's letter one more time, reading her words again for strength and reassurance. Then he placed it back in his pocket, a physical reminder of why he was about to do something that terrified him. Sophie walked with him to the car, squeezing his hand before he got in. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence and support were enough. As the car pulled away from the palace, Edward felt his heart rate increase. The documentary crew would be expecting a gentle, nostalgic conversation. Instead, they were about to witness something unprecedented. Edward was preparing to offer a confession, to reveal truths he had hidden for his entire life, to honor the Queen's final wish by breaking the very silence that had defined him for so long. The studio felt smaller than Edward had imagined. Lights hung from the ceiling, casting a bright, almost clinical glow across the set. Cameras stood positioned at different angles, their lenses like dark eyes waiting to capture every expression, every gesture, every moment of vulnerability. The crew moved quietly around the space, checking equipment and making final adjustments. They had been told this would be a straightforward interview, a respectful tribute to the late Queen from her youngest son. Everyone expected a calm, composed conversation that would generate positive headlines and warm public sentiment. Edward sat in the chair they had prepared for him, feeling the stiffness of the formal setup. A makeup artist had briefly touched up his face, ensuring he looked presentable under the harsh lighting. He declined the offer of water, knowing his hands might shake if he tried to hold a glass. The Queen's letter pressed against his chest from inside his jacket pocket, a constant reminder of why he was here and what he needed to do. His heartbeat quickened as the final preparations concluded and the interviewer took her seat across from him. The interviewer was a respected journalist known for her gentle approach with royal family members. She had conducted numerous interviews over the years, always maintaining a respectful distance while asking thoughtful questions. She smiled warmly at Edward, clearly trying to put him at ease. The cameras began recording, red lights blinking to indicate they were live. The interviewer started with the expected opening, asking Edward to share his fondest memories of his mother and what her loss had meant to him personally. Edward paused before answering. The silence stretched longer than would normally be comfortable in a television interview. The crew shifted slightly, wondering if there was a technical problem, but Edward was simply gathering himself, preparing to step off the path everyone expected him to follow. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, but steady and clear. He began talking about the Queen's strength and grace, her decades of dedicated service, her remarkable ability to adapt to changing times while maintaining core values. These were safe topics, the kind of tribute anyone might offer. But then Edward's tone shifted. He began speaking about pain, not in abstract terms, but as something real and present. He talked about hidden wounds that never healed, about struggles that remained invisible because people were too afraid or too proud to acknowledge them. He said the royal family, despite its public image of unity and strength, carried cracks that had been growing for years. These fractures frightened even the Queen during her final years, though she had worked tirelessly to prevent them from widening into irreparable breaks. The interviewer's expression changed. This was not what she had anticipated. Her prepared questions suddenly seemed inadequate for the direction the conversation was taking. She glanced briefly at her notes, then back at Edward, uncertain whether to redirect him towards safer territory or allow him to continue. Edward made the decision for her by pressing forward, his words gaining momentum as suppressed feelings finally found release. He spoke about living behind carefully constructed smiles, about carrying loneliness so quietly that nobody noticed it was there. He described watching his family change over the years, seeing warmth replaced by distance, witnessing connections grow thinner and more fragile. He said the Queen had noticed everything, that her awareness of family dynamics was far more acute than anyone realized. She had trusted Edward with something precious and private, something she considered vital to the monarchy's future. She had warned him that silence destroys families more effectively than any public scandal ever could. The crew remained completely still. Camera operators forgot to adjust their angles. Sound technicians stopped monitoring their equipment. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something historic, something that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Edward's hands trembled slightly, just enough to reveal the emotional cost of his words. He wasn't performing grief or manufacturing drama for the cameras. This was genuine vulnerability, raw and unfiltered in a way the public had never seen from any senior royal family member. Edward began talking about his childhood, about being the quiet son in a family of strong personalities. He described feeling like an extra piece in a royal puzzle, present but not quite essential. He had tried to stay calm, tried to be strong, tried to honor his mother's example of dignified service. But inside, he often felt unseen and unheard. The comparisons to his siblings had hurt more than he ever admitted. The constant sense of being overlooked had shaped him in ways both obvious and subtle. He had learned to find value in staying small, in not demanding attention, in accepting whatever space others left for him. The weight of unspoken expectations had been crushing at times. Edward admitted he carried guilt that had accumulated over decades. He felt guilty for not speaking up sooner, for watching the family drift apart without intervening, for failing to protect the Queen's vision of family unity. He had told himself his silence was noble, that staying out of conflicts made him a peacemaker. But the Queen's letter had forced him to recognize that silence could be its own form of betrayal, that sometimes love required uncomfortable honesty rather than comfortable avoidance. At one point, Edward stopped speaking entirely. He looked down at his hands, his jaw tightening as he struggled to maintain composure. The interviewer leaned forward slightly, her voice soft with genuine concern. She asked if he needed a moment, if he wanted to pause the recording. Edward shook his head slowly. He needed to continue, needed to finish what he had started. The truth was that he wasn't okay. Not today, not after everything that had happened. Pretending otherwise would dishonor both the Queen's memory and the purpose of this conversation. Edward described the family meeting that had pushed him to his breaking point. He recounted King Charles stating that some relationships within the family were beyond repair. The words had cut through Edward like a physical wound. They represented a fundamental rejection of everything the Queen had believed about family, forgiveness, and the possibility of healing. She had never given up on anyone, never declared any relationship irredeemable. She had believed that with patience, humility, and genuine effort, even the most damaged bonds could be restored. Hearing those words from Charles had activated something in Edward that had been dormant for years. He felt the Queen's presence in that moment, felt her values and teachings rising up inside him. For the first time in his life, he had stood up and confronted his family directly. He told them they were losing themselves in the pursuit of perfection, that their obsession with appearing strong and united was actually destroying real connection. He said the Queen would be devastated to see how quickly they had abandoned her most deeply held beliefs about family. The nation watching this interview had never encountered this version of Prince Edward. The public knew him as steady, reliable, and somewhat bland, the royal family member least likely to generate headlines or controversy. This raw honesty, this willingness to expose personal pain and family dysfunction was completely unprecedented. Edward's voice softened as he continued, but the power of his words only intensified. He said he feared the monarchy was losing its heart, not because of scandals or public criticism, but because of the emotional dishonesty at its core. The interviewer found her voice again, asking carefully phrased questions to guide the conversation. But Edward barely needed prompting now. The dam had broken and words flowed freely. He admitted that the family had grown noticeably colder after the Queen's death, more distant and guarded. He said he felt he had failed her final wish, that despite his best intentions, he hadn't been able to prevent the fragmentation she had feared. He admitted crying alone many nights, grieving not just his mother's death, but the death of the family unity she had spent 7 decades building and protecting. Edward spoke about feeling invisible within his own family, about being present at events and gatherings, but somehow still alone. He described the exhausting work of maintaining appearances, of pretending everything was fine when nothing felt fine. He talked about the monarchy's future with genuine anxiety, wondering whether an institution built on tradition and continuity could survive if the family at its center had lost the ability to genuinely care for one another. Then something shifted in Edward's demeanor. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closing around the letter that had changed everything. He pulled it out slowly, handling it with the reverence someone might show a sacred text. The paper looked delicate under the studio lights, the Queen's handwriting visible even from a distance. Edward held it carefully, as though holding his mother's hand one more time. He told the interviewer this letter represented the Queen's final message to him, her last expression of trust, her ultimate request for what she hoped he would do. The interviewer's eyes widened. Nobody on the production team had known about this letter. Its existence added an entirely new dimension to the interview. She asked gently what the Queen had written, what message she had left for her youngest son. Edward looked down at the letter, his finger tracing the edge of the paper. He hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of equipment. Every person in the room waited, barely breathing. Edward lifted his head, meeting the camera's gaze directly. He said his mother's words were not meant for just one person. The letter contained truths about family, about love, about the real work required to maintain meaningful connections. These truths needed to be heard by everyone in the family, not kept private and unspoken. He looked directly into the camera lens, speaking not just to the interviewer but to the nation, to his family, to anyone who would listen. He announced that he was ready to reveal the letter's contents publicly, word for word, holding nothing back. He unfolded the paper carefully, preparing to read the Queen's handwriting aloud. His hands shook slightly, but his resolve remained firm. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Just as Edward opened his mouth to speak the first words of his mother's letter, the studio doors burst open with sudden violence. A palace official rushed in, his face flushed and his breathing heavy. He moved quickly across the set, whispering urgently into the director's ear. The director's expression transformed instantly from calm professionalism to shocked concern. Something serious had happened, something that threatened to derail everything. The official's arrival marked the beginning of a confrontation that would test Edward's resolve and potentially change the course of the royal family forever. The studio descended into immediate chaos. The official who had burst through the doors looked panicked, his usual composure completely shattered. He spoke rapidly to the director, his words tumbling out in urgent whispers that nonetheless carried across the suddenly quiet space. The director raised both hands in a stopping gesture and called out loudly for everyone to cease recording. Camera operators immediately hit their switches, red lights blinking off one by one. The bright studio lights dimmed slightly, as though the entire space was holding its breath. Edward remained seated, the Queen's letter still unfolded in his hands. He said nothing, waiting to understand what had caused this disruption. The official approached him with careful, measured steps that seemed almost apologetic. He leaned down close to Edward's ear and began speaking in low tones. Edward's entire demeanor changed within seconds. His eyes widened. His breathing became shallow and quick. The hand holding the letter began to tremble more noticeably. Whatever news the official was delivering, it was clearly serious enough to shake even Edward's carefully maintained composure. The interviewer watched nervously from her chair, uncertain whether she should leave or stay. The crew stood frozen in their positions, nobody quite knowing what protocol to follow in such an unprecedented situation. Sophie, who had been waiting quietly in a corner of the studio, stepped forward with visible concern on her face. She moved toward Edward but stopped when the official held up a hand, indicating she should wait. The tension in the room became almost unbearable as Edward closed his eyes, seeming to gather himself against whatever blow he had just received. After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a minute, the official decided to explain the situation to the entire room. His voice carried a formal authority that barely masked his own anxiety. He announced that Buckingham Palace had learned about the interview's true direction. They knew Edward was planning to read the Queen's personal letter on camera. A message had been sent directly from the palace demanding immediate intervention. The letter, according to palace officials, must never become public. They claimed the Queen's words were too sensitive, too revealing, and too potentially damaging to the monarchy's reputation and stability. Edward felt something collapse inside him. The Queen had written that letter specifically for him and had trusted him with her deepest concerns and hopes. She had wanted emotional honesty within the family, and now the institution she had devoted her entire life to serving wanted to bury her message, to hide her authentic voice, to pretend her concerns had never existed. The betrayal of it struck Edward with physical force. He looked down at the letter in his hands, seeing his mother's handwriting through a blur of emotion. He felt anger rising within him, a quiet but deep anger that came from having something sacred violated. Sophie saw the shift in his expression and recognized what it meant. Edward was reaching a decision point, a moment where he would either retreat into his usual pattern of accommodation or stand firm for something he believed truly mattered. Edward stood up slowly from his chair. He walked toward the edge of the set with steady steps, though his hands still trembled. He thought about the Queen's voice, her gentle guidance throughout his life, her final trust placed in him through the letter he held. He thought about the family meeting where Charles had dismissed the possibility of healing broken relationships. He felt his mother's presence, not as a ghost or supernatural force, but as memory and love and everything she had taught him about what truly mattered. He turned back to face the director and spoke with quiet firmness. He said he wanted the cameras turned back on. The director looked shocked, glancing toward the official for guidance. The official shook his head sharply, his expression stern. He reminded Edward that the palace had forbidden the broadcast. Edward raised his hand in a simple but decisive gesture. He said this was his mother's voice, and her voice deserved to be heard. Sophie moved closer, her voice soft but urgent. She asked if he was certain this was safe. Edward looked at her with an expression that mixed love and determination. He told her honestly that, no, this wasn't safe. But it was right. He had spent too long choosing safety over truth, and the Queen's letter had shown him the cost of that choice. The official stepped forward again, panic clear in his voice now. He insisted that Edward could not proceed. Edward interrupted him with a single sentence that shocked everyone in the studio. He said quietly but firmly that he was done being silent. His voice carried no anger, no aggression, just an unshakable resolve. Before anyone could move, another message arrived from Buckingham Palace. The official's face went pale as he read it. King Charles himself required Prince Edward's immediate return to the palace. The interview must end now. The room fell into a deeper silence than before. Even William had apparently sent his own message demanding they stop him. Edward stepped toward the cameras once more, unfolding the Queen's letter with shaking hands. Just as he began to speak, the studio doors flew open again. Palace guards entered, their presence immediately commanding attention. A senior palace representative followed them carrying a red-sealed document. Everyone in the studio gasped audibly. Edward's face drained of all color as he recognized what the sealed document represented. This was a royal order, issued under emergency protocols. The representative stepped forward with formal bearing, and Edward realized the order contained provisions that could potentially silence him permanently. The truth inside that document would determine whether the Queen's final message would remain forever, hidden behind palace walls.